As we mentioned up top, tensions continue to rise in Minneapolis. The Trump administration is hoping to bring down the temperature to de-escalate. What is the state of things on the ground, and what role does local law enforcement have in all this? Joining me with his unique perspective, New York Police detective and CEO of Brosnan Investigative Group, Patrick Brosnan. Thanks for coming back to the show. Now, you've been following what's happening down there, Pat, in Minneapolis. From a law enforcement perspective, what are we missing here? It seems you see ICE, you see Border Patrol, you don't see any local cops.
Well, good afternoon, Raymond, and you nailed it. The reality is law enforcement, it's never a pretty business, never. Not today, not yesterday, not 50 years ago. But the fact is, we're partners in blue. So the ICE officers and the patrol border officers, they're all sworn federal officers with municipal authority. The officers, the Minneapolis officers, there's 600 of them, are all sworn state officers that have sworn to the state constitution. That's the fact of it. For them to have any kind of divide, first of all, it's without precedent. It's without precedent. For any division, divide, or non-compliance on the part of 911 calls for assistance from the municipal authorities, the Minneapolis PD, for their federal partners, I've never encountered it, and certainly not at scale. There were some isolated incidents I could think of in Chicago, fairly recent, but again, it was federal, state. This is unheard of stuff, and their leader there, the chief, seems to be, by all accounts, not a good leader, in my view. He's not a leader of men. He's certainly not a figure that the guys are following to the extent that he's created divides amongst them. Look, ICE, you don't have to like them. You don't, but you have to obey them. They have authority. They're federally sworn, federally trained, and they have a mission. And that's just the way it is. And for them to have created this wall between them, again, unprecedented and terrifying in some ways, because it puts officers at great risk on both sides of the equation, by the way.
Yeah, no, I know reporters there in Minneapolis, and they will tell you, as do the locals, near these ICE and protester clashes, because what happens is ICE moves in and suddenly protesters show up. They get the high sign, and the cops are 2 blocks away or 3 blocks away sitting in a squad car. So this is a very dangerous, you've got to secure your city and at least ensure public safety. I don't know why they don't cordon off these protesters and say, look, you can protest over here, but you can't get in the middle of a federal operation.
It's ridiculous, and it comes from the leadership from the Minneapolis PD. He is a real problem. He is anti-ICE. He is anti-uniformity between the various agencies. And the reality is people are being put at risk. He's playing Russian roulette with the lives not just of federal ICE officers, but also his officers, because there are protesters who will just lump law enforcement into one bucket. And they don't care if they have a blue uniform on or if they're masked and they have a different color uniform on representing ICE officials. But I have not seen that before, as I mentioned earlier, and it's beyond dangerous and beyond without precedent. And it has to do with the rhetoric from the top. And I hesitate to even use rhetoric, Raymond, because it's really poison. Rhetoric is too kind of a noun to use. This is poisonous invective. You know?
I want to talk about this death of Alex Prady, who was shot. He was again, in the middle of a federal operation, taunting officers, protesting against them. He had a firearm. The administration initially characterized this as a clear case of self-defense. But eyewitness video tell a more complicated story here. What's your assessment of what happened when you saw it?
So I've looked at the tape probably 50 times. I've looked at the compendium of tapes that the New York Times did, the Wall Street Journal did, all the different ones. And I will tell you, as someone who has reviewed professionally in private industry hundreds of tapes, I always suggest to take a step backward, let the facts develop incrementally. That's the confluence of ear witnesses, eyewitnesses, videotape, also audio on the tape, and other factors that in totality provide the story. The story being from the very beginning to the middle when the rounds were discharged to the end. And as of right now, as far as I'm concerned, it's inconclusive and it's premature in the arc of the investigation to make an investigative decision or an interim disposition relating to the justifiable nature of it. I will stand by my advice, Raymond.
Yeah.
If you're armed and you approach law enforcement in an aggressive way while armed, you're really putting your life in danger, because if they identify it, and this is constitutionally valid, if they identify that as a threat that's imminent and deadly, that's where deadly physical force comes from.
When you couple that, Patrick, with what you've been talking about, a lack of local law enforcement protecting both the citizenry, the protesters, and the ICE agents, it creates a nervous, tense moment. And these guys don't know what happened, and they feel under stress. But we should also share this video, authenticated by the BBC, released this week. This was a prior altercation. I believe it was 11 days before he was killed. This is Alex Preedy kicking an ICE agent's vehicle, spitting, shouting obscenities. Watch this. Look, none of this is to justify what happened 11 days later, but it does give us some insight into at least the mindset of Mr. Preedy when he engaged with officers, and perhaps gives us a wider context of why a tragic moment like this might have happened.
I start with the first question, Raymond. Why would an individual bring 63 bullets, 3 clips, 2 spares, and a clip in the magazine? I own that gun. I know that gun very well. Why would they bring that to a protest? What possible rationale or reason would they have for going to a protest with 63 bullets in it?
No, it's on its face, it's a dangerous thing to do in the middle of a federal investigation. You can't taunt and spit at federal officers. You're risking your life, as you said. I want to talk about the safety of the federal agents themselves. The Department of Homeland Security reported 99 vehicles ramming attacks against ICE and Border Patrol between January and November of last year. There have been coordinated ambushes and sniper attacks, 8,000% increase in death threats. These ICE agents opened fire 16 times since July, Patrick. What's the lived reality for these officers on the ground right now, do you think?
Well, they're under attack from a structured series of events that have training. So there's training, there's intelligence being gathered, both data and information about where they're staying, the license plate information on the register of their vehicles, what they may even look like underneath the mask. And this is part of a program to deauthorize the validity of their mission, their federal mission, all valid and authenticated, in terms of the capture of these criminal illegals. And this, in some cases, as you mentioned, Raymond, it does violate into felony space under interfering and obstruction with a federal matter. Yeah. You don't have an option on that. There's not an option. There's no option. You must obey. You must obey them. That's the law. That's the rule of law, which, by the way, clearly is out the window in many regards in Minneapolis.
Yeah. Well, because you've got politics being mixed in and people wanting to have an incendiary moment that they can broadcast and change the narrative here. And this is so awful because you're putting agents at risk, you're putting the protesters at risk, and the public well-being at risk. On Monday, Border Czar Tom Homan arrived in Minneapolis to help take charge of this situation. Now, he's there under President Trump's orders. Homan had this to say at the press conference this week regarding the outrage against ICE law enforcement.
Where were they when women and children are dying making that journey? Where were they when over 4,000 families making that journey died, historic record? Where were they? Not a word. President Trump promised to make this country safe again, and that's what we're doing. I begged for the last 2 months on TV for the rhetoric to stop. I said in March, if the rhetoric didn't stop, there's going to be bloodshed. And there has been. I wish I wasn't right. I don't want to see anybody die. Not officers, not members of the community, and not the targets of our operations.
Patrick, he sounds like you talking about the rhetoric, but Homan has been saying this, begging people to tone down the language and stop targeting our officers.
He's excellent, and I watched the entire news conference, and I recognized the quotes. I liked his tone. It was more conciliatory. It was a slightly different Tom Homan. I've had the honor of meeting him a few times. I had him on my radio show. The fact is, he speaks the truth. He's a 4-decade veteran of these federal agencies, both in leadership and in the field. And the reality is this: they are under full attack. And what the public doesn't always understand, Raymond, is that the poisonous invective and vitriol that they're spewing about Nazis and Gestapo and the Waffen-SS and masks and guns and violence, that gets ingrained into the DNA and the memory of folks in the field, and it serves to further pollute their thinking, and they actually deauthorize in their minds the validity of their mission and the fact that they are no different than the sworn officers in Minneapolis that, by the way, have not been helpful. But they are the same. They have the same rule of law, the same adherence to protect and serve. And it's that diminution, I believe, that's leading to the proactive assaults that you referenced, 8,000% and so forth. This is terrifying stuff. This is really bad. And by the way, we're in the middle of an Arctic freeze. What happens when we have a full moon and 90 degrees? Then what happens?
Right. Well, that's right. Thank God this isn't happening in the summer. It'd be a million people on the streets. But I did like Homan's tone. It was tamping things down, and you've got the reassignments, and you've got, a de-escalation in place. Let's hope this works. But at the same time, and this is what's so disturbing, you have Bruce Springsteen releasing a song basically saying any brown or black person can be deported, which is ludicrous. No, you can't do that. And as a Hispanic, I take offense at that. We've also heard a great deal from the U.S. Catholic bishops on ICE and Border Patrol operations, including Cardinal Joseph Tobin, who issued this video message asking that ICE be defunded.
In this week, when an appropriations bill is going to be considered in Congress, will you contact the senators and representative from your district? We ask them for the love of God and the love of human beings, which can't be separated. Vote against renewing funding for such a lawless organization.
Patrick, you've been in law enforcement your whole life. Is ICE a lawless organization? And does this endanger the lives of the Catholic ICE agents who are on the street?
Lawless, indeed not. They are fully lawful, fully law-abiding, extremely well-trained, have all the constraints and process and protocol that a large municipal police agency would have for the state. This is just a biblical level pile-on, Raymond. That's what it is. They're just piling on. They feel that they have wind at their sails, and they're just pushing to defund. Meanwhile, do they want these rapists? Do they want these murderers? Do they want these burglars and robbers to be free on the street? These are illegal aliens that have criminal records. If they would just let the ICE agents go in, one ICE agent could go in and transfer a criminal outside of the police agency, out of corrections, and put them in cuffs. Now it's got to be 15 of them. So the blood is on their hands. That's where the blood lies. It's on Fry and it's on Waltz, and they are profoundly wrong. They're really bad guys, I have to say. I really have to say that, because this has really gotten out of hand now.
Well, look, we've seen these ICE operations in Florida and Louisiana. In other places, local law enforcement cooperates when they've got an illegal alien in custody. They alert ICE. ICE comes, takes them away. It's not a problem. But here, when you don't have that cooperation, it creates these flashpoints that are so heartbreaking to watch, frankly, Patrick. And it, as you said, it pollutes the entire political organism and turns people against
1,000%.
valid and hardworking law enforcement who are keeping people safe.
It's a sanctuary city mindset. The reality is they have taken this ideological position that by default causes more harm, not just to the ICE agents, but more harm to the citizenry. When all of these transfer of criminals under incarceration who are being held, that transfer is very easy, very peaceful. It's done within a correctional facility, and off they go into an immigration center. This is so easy, but their hardline resistance is making it 20-fold worse in the street. And that's why the blood is on their hands, because this is completely preventable. This is how you do business. Like you mentioned, the other states, no problem, easy squeezy. Transferring a prisoner, very simple.
The U.S. Catholic Bishops' Conference recently released what they called a special message, okay? And it states that, quote, we oppose the indiscriminate mass deportation of people. Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago said to NPR that this is an indiscriminate mass deportation and a lack of immigration reform. Your reaction to those statements?
Madness. It's, again, biblical level madness. The fact is that the word alien, the word immigrant, is modified by an adjective, and the adjective is illegal. They are illegal. They are against the rule of law. And the fact is, rules have to be abided by. And today, under Trump, thank God Almighty, crime is illegal again. So when you're an illegal immigrant, you are a criminal. That's the way it works. That's what the words mean. This fantasy, this fabrication, this narrative, none of it's based in reality or the rule of law or statutory elements of the criminal procedure law. This is just something that they dream up to advance their narrative.
Yeah. Senator Amy Klobuchar, who's now announced she's running for governor of the state, and other Democrats are threatening to block DHS funding for ICE. Some Republicans, Senator Tom Tillis, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, they've broken with the administration calling for independent investigations. This has become incredibly politicized and polarized. How do we get to a place where we can actually have an honest conversation about the rule of law, and if you don't like the rule of law, change the rule of law, lobby to change it, but you can't attack law enforcement?
It's going to be very difficult, and I hate to say it. I saw it in New York in 2014 when de Blasio joined the teeming masses, and next thing you know, Wenjin Liu and Rafael Ramos, two NYPD uniform officers, were murdered in their radio car having lunch because rhetoric has consequences. Poisonous vitriol poisons. That's the way it works. We saw it again in the Summer of Love in 2020 after St. Floyd's murder, right? The fact is that they have they're so far apart because they've dug their feet into the stand on the left, and they're digging them in like that. They're not even listening to reason, logic, or rationale. And people are dying and others are getting injured. And all of it is 100% preventable. That's the saddest part of it. This is standard operating procedure. I locked up 1,000 guys, Raymond. No one ever gave me a hard time. I took them to corrections. I took them out. I put them into lodging, took them to Rikers. It didn't take 15 guys. It took me and a partner. They are obfuscating the facts, and they are breaking down the whole system through their ideological narratives. And it's twisted. It really is very twisted.
Before I let you go, what is your message to the people who are protesting, which is their right, in Minneapolis, and the level of tension that is being created as a result of it? What would you advise them?
I would advise them to tone it down, to abide by the laws, do not spit at officers, do not fire ice balls at them, do not stalk their residences, do not convey personal information on them. Let the legal machinery of the justice system move forward, let it grind forward, and also don't be aggressive with officers on a federal investigation. Certainly don't carry a weapon on them. And things will work. They will work. They'll go into court system. That's why it's the rule of law. It's the process, the procedure, the protocol of law. Tamp it down, folks, because you're not going to win. You're not going to win. You're not going to win on this one.
That is such a great point, Patrick, that gets lost in a lot of the heated political rhetoric. This idea that, we're rounding people up, we're just throwing them out. No, You're taking them, and then they go through a legal procedure. You don't just get to put them on a boat and send them somewhere. This isn't like, you know, the angel of death coming and taking people away. It's not what's happening. So that's a great point.
Right.
They have to abide by the rule of law. And as you saw with that judge who said this week Trump had to return a lot of these detainees, which I guess they're appealing. But there is a legal battle behind the scenes. This is just getting people who have records, who are in violation of the law, off the streets. And I'll give you the last word.
Exactly. Well, no, you're precisely right, Raymond. You nailed it. The fact is, this is just a rudimentary step. It's the transfer of a prisoner. It's very simple. It's been going on forever, for centuries. They're going to stand in front of a judge. They're going to afford all the sensibilities and the rules surrounding the process. This is just a step. That's all it is. Let the step happen. Let then the machinery work in the Justice Department. Tamp it down, folks. Calm yourself down, because you're not going to win in the long run. There's no winning in the long run. But we don't want anybody else hurt. Not ICE agents, not resistors.
Patrick Brosnan, we will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. And you can follow Patrick on X at Patrick J. Brosnan. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Raymond. My pleasure. Keep up the great work.